in verse 9 to 12, but I thought we'd do a little background on Noah first. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Noah was a man of God who God saw favor with in an unfavorable time. God called him to build an ark to save him and his family and the animals of the world from this great flood which was going to come. Noah had great faith to do all that the Lord had asked him. He was a righteous man living in a world of sin. Today, we are living in a world of sin. If you look around at the world today, you look at the news, or you look at, even you talk to people that you don't know, it's almost obvious that this world is in sin. The world is fallen, and there is a problem with it. Now, I'm going to focus a little differently on Noah than we've probably heard of in the past. I'm going to focus on that Christ, that God called him a righteous man, and that God saw favor with him. Not so much on his diligence or on his obedience or on those other things that you normally hear about him building the ark, but the fact that it is possible to be a righteous man or woman in a world that is full of sin. So today we learned a couple things. We are living in sin, and God promised us in Genesis 8 verse 21 that he will never again destroy the ground because of man, but we do know that we are living in a world of sin and that we need to be different. So we'll start today in Genesis 6 verse 9 through 12. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of the Lord and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on the earth had corruption in their ways. Now, that doesn't sound too terribly far from where we are today. When you look around, it seems like a lot of people are violent and are corrupt in all of their ways. Now, there was 2 things I loved with this first verse. It says that Noah was righteous, blameless, and walked faithfully with God. It's an amazing thought to think that we can do these things. We can be faithful, we can be righteous, and we can walk faithfully with God. Now, something terrible had happened to the world in Noah's day, and man began to refuse to obey God to the point of which the Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of every thought of the human heart was only evil. It says that in Genesis 6 to 5, that every thought of man was evil. To me, that is a scary, scary thing to think that people could get so corrupt, that we could be so disobedient to God and go so far from him that God thinks that he needs to destroy the world. Like he flooded the world because of the sin of man. Now, man did only evil continually. They did nothing pure, nor noble, nor good, or honorable. I know I recently have read some news and some things like that, and it just blew my mind how far we can get from God, how far man can go, that we can have nothing pure, that we can be not good and not honorable in our actions. And it just blows my mind that this is a reoccurring theme. Now, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord in Genesis 6:8. Noah was different. He was separate. Noah was a great man who believed in the midst of runaway immorality. Now, it's even said that his grandfather and his father gave way into sinful influence, and it says that. But it's just focusing that there is the possibility to live righteous even in the midst of unimaginable unrighteousness. My the theory for the next couple sermons is to look at some biblical examples of righteous men. We're beginning with Noah, but Daniel did it, Abraham did it, Moses did it, Jeremiah did it, Paul and Silas also did it along with Noah. There are a lot of accounts where God has said they lived righteously. Now, whenever we say to live righteously, I think that we need to clear that up, what righteous is. Righteousness is not perfection nor sinless. There's a difference. If I said that, I'd be wrong. In 1 John verse 1 to 8, it says, if we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. But to be righteous man or woman is a possibility even in a sinless world. In a sinful world, not sinless world. That'd probably be confusing. But I just want to say that there's a difference between righteousness and perfection. Sometimes whenever you say to be righteous, it has a negative indication because you think, oh, that person thinks he's so righteous, or that person thinks there's all those different things that you hear people say about religious people. But to be righteous does not mean I am sinless, but to mean that I am right with God, that I am going with God. And it is possible to be that in a sinful world. Noah had some things that were attributed to him that I think led to his righteousness. Noah was a man of courage. Noah was courageous because he stood alone against the world. A world was full of men who were evil all the time, but he continually walked with God. Noah went against the flow of the world. The flow of the world today is similar to the flow of the world at Noah's time. The world wants to be evil, it wants to be corrupt, it wants to go into that darkness, but we can stand separate. We can stand apart from it. We can have courage to be different. Noah was courageous because the odds did not stop him. God called him to build a boat like the world had never seen. He called him to do something that had never been done. And he trusted the Lord and did it. He had the courage to do it. I think if God came to me and said, Will, you need to build some spaceship that's never been built before, I'd go, well, A, not qualified, not a carpenter. B, it's never been done. I don't think it's possible. That would be my immediate response to God calling me to do something that's been undone, that has never been done. But Noah had courage to just do it. He said, okay, I will do it. And he followed through with it. He had courage to do what had not been done. Also, Noah preached many years without seeing a conversion. If you look at that, if it says the whole world was corrupt and Noah was good, if he was living his life as Christ and righteously, he was open about his faith probably. And if nobody else was saved, think how bad that would feel. How long would you live your life? If I went and preached something every day in my community and never once had one person say, I agree with you, or never once had somebody change their ways, you would go, well, I am the only one. I must be the one that's wrong. Eventually that has to cross your mind. But he had the courage to continue. He had the faith to continue. I think so often that would have been so tough to know that you lived your whole life and the rest of the world was going to be flooded. I think that to be Noah in that situation would be hard. It would be a difficult thing. We need to live like Noah and do our part to let God take care of the rest. In the midst of wickedness, we need to trust. We need to preach righteousness, teach the truth, defend the faith, sow the seed, and not worry about the result. We're called to sow the seed. If it falls on dry, hard ground and doesn't take root, that's God taking care of that. God will grow the thing. It's our job to plant the seed, and sometimes it doesn't grow. And sometimes it doesn't go the way that you think it will, and that's hard, but you have to stay in the faith. You have to continue to be faithful and obedient. Noah was just. In Genesis 6 verse 9, this is an account of Noah's life. Noah was righteous man, blameless of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. He was also just. He was a just man, and the righteous is the other version of that. He is what is right. Noah was righteous, not sinless. He obeyed God and walked with God. Noah lived by faith. In Hebrews 11 verse 7, it talks about Noah. It says, by faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness in keeping of his faith. Notice that Noah moved with godly fear and prepared an ark. It is one thing to believe, it is another thing to have action that goes along with your faith. If Noah would have not been a man of action, he would not have been a man of faith or a righteous man. Faith must obey. I go into James, and I know that I love James, and I know I go there a lot, but James 2, verse 22, you see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. Noah had faith and trusted in God, and that is a great thing. It is great to have that kind of faith, but it's another thing to have that action to follow through with it. It's another thing to have the obedience that follows with your faith. That's what it truly takes. Blessed are we that have faith, but until that faith manifests itself in actions of obedience, it is incomplete. The obedience comes with the faith. Noah had godly fear. It says that in Hebrews, we just read that. It says Noah moved with fear. This is another thing that Noah did in his obedience. It was not only that he was obedient, that he was faithful, but he was moved with fear. Now, this is not the fear that we think that makes you tremble. I gave a sermon on having godly fear. And we talked about the difference. It's not that childhood fear or being afraid in the corner, but it's different. Hebrew word for fear in this situation is yar, which implies awe or reverence, if we remember, rather than objecting to terror. It's a different thought. He revered the Lord rather than feared the Lord. He acted in obedience because of his fear. Now, if we look at the definition of revere, it is to have a deep respect or admiration for something. So what we have here is he was deeply amazed and respected the Lord. So part of his obedience came from his fear of the Lord, his respect, his reverence, his awe of the Lord. It wasn't just that he was faithful, it wasn't just that he was obedient, but he feared the Lord. He respected the Lord and what he had told him. So Noah knew the majesty of the Lord. Noah feared the Lord. Now, that being said, the Lord also told him that he was going to flood the whole world. There might have been the other fear there a little bit too. I would say that he probably thought, well, there's a reason I need to be faithful a little bit here. You know, if God told me that he was going to do that, it'd kind of change you'd put a little pep in your step, I think. But that's not the point. To be godly means to love God, to be a follower of God, to emulate God. Whereas to have godly fear means to respect, to revere God, to be unwilling to do anything that would cause God to be displeased. Noah had both. Noah was doing something different than the rest of the world. He stood alone in a world full of sin. And today it feels so much that way. There's days that you wake up and you think that you are alone. And you read and look at the news, or you go out into the world and you think, am I the only one that sees this way? Am I the only one that knows that that's sin? We live in a world where sin has corrupted people to their core. We are called to be different. And the thing is, with Noah as our example, you can see it's possible to be different. It's achievable to be different in a world full of sin. Lastly, Noah was obedient to God. Obedience, I think, is the word that best describes Noah. When you look at his life, he was obedient in the story. One cannot just be courageous. One cannot just be just. One cannot just be faithful and have godly fear unless they are truly obedient to God. Being obedient is hard, especially when you don't understand the full picture. Especially when you don't see what God is seeing. If God came to you and said, build an ark because it's going to be this thing, I think it would be a struggle because you'd go, well, floods don't happen like that. I haven't seen a flood like that. Or you would have all these different things that go through your head because you don't see the full picture. You don't see all of God's plan, and sometimes we struggle being obedient to God in our life. There are things that God has called me personally in my own life to do that it struggles me to be obedient with because myself gets in the way. I think I know better, or that can't be right. And you get that struggle where being obedient is hard. It's hard to be obedient to your parents sometimes. It's a struggle to be obedient because I don't see what they see. I haven't had the experiences they've had, and we think that it's hard to be obedient to your parents, but look at God. God sees the whole picture. He knows everybody's life. He knows your life intimately. Probably He knows you. He does know you more than you ever will know yourself. And to follow His plan, to be obedient to that plan is something so beautiful and so great. And I'll tell you, it is a struggle. It is hard to continually be obedient, especially when the world is not obedient. God told Noah to build an ark. He did it. He gave him exact dimensions. He gave him a list of materials. He said, build it this way with these things at this time. And Noah did according unto all that the Lord commanded him. In Genesis 7:5. He did all according to what the Lord had commanded him. Now, Chris has given me instructions on building things or tearing things down or doing things differently. And I have found myself in the shop as I'm building it think, if I did it this way, it would be faster. Or if I use this, it would be cheaper. And you find yourself doing all those things. And guess what? The end product isn't as good as what Chris would have had me do if I just followed it step by step. Or, worse yet, it doesn't even function. If God had called me to build this boat and I had done it the way I thought, it would have sank immediately. Or there definitely wouldn't have been enough room for everything. Because I'd have been like, this room's unnecessary. Or, this is too big. Or, we don't really need this. I don't like sheep. Like, there would have been all those different things that go through my head. But Noah did according to God. Noah was given a pattern and he obeyed it. Plain and simple. Sometimes we love complicating simple. When God tells you to do something, obey. Trust the Lord. It's simple. It's so much simpler when we just obey. What would have happened if Noah hadn't obeyed what God called him to do? Well, the boat would have sank, possibly. It may not have held all the animals. Well, to be plain and simple, it just wouldn't have worked unless he followed God's plan. Today, we are called to build an ark according to God's pattern. It's not truly an ark, but we are called to something for God. God has called each and every one of us with a specific plan and a purpose for our life. We have a reason in God's plan, and you may not see the end result, and sometimes you feel lost and like the whole world is turned against you. It feels like the world has just plain and simple gone crazy. It feels like you are the only sane person, or else you're the crazy one living in this world. But we need to trust God and obey His plan. Be faithful. Be courageous. Be righteous. Fear God. And above all, be obedient to Him. Now, I like the story of Noah, and I know this isn't probably the way that Noah's ever been taught, but I think it's important to see that we have a lot more in common with Him than we think. We live in a world full of sin that's fallen and obviously disobedient to God. We live in a world that is not striving to be godly, but striving for sin. But because of Noah, we can see an example of a man that lived righteously in the midst of the world. Now, it's not going to be easy. It never says it'll be easy. It's going to be work. It's going to be hard. We will fail. We will sin. We will do all those things. But you can continually follow in pursuit of Christ and to be Christ-like as Christians, as we are to be called. And the world can see us as something different. We can be something different to the world. It's possible to be righteous in an unrighteous place. So as we go out into this week and as we continue into our lives and our growth and our walk with Christ, we can continually be striving to be different. Continually striving to be something that's not of this world but of Christ. And to be righteous in the eyes of the Lord. To walk with God. It's a struggle and it will not be easy. And I tell you that I fail daily in it. But to follow Christ and to be obedient to His plan will open up to a much more glorious, beautiful plan than we could have ever had for ourselves. What God has for you is so much better than we could have on our own. Contrary to what the world will say, we need Christ, not self-help.